Okay, let's get a start. Good afternoon, everyone. As many of you know, my name is Prue Klein, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at Wine Communicators of Australia. Today's webinar guest is Simon Gawn, Managing Director, Sydney, for Denomination Design. Simon will be covering the increasing need and desire for purpose-led brands, brands with sustainability at their heart and centre, and brands that consider wellbeing with the drinks category, plus much more. We have allowed plenty of time for any questions you may have to be answered at the end of the webinar. However, feel free to send them through to me via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A button and not the chat for any questions you may have. As usual, this webinar will be recorded and a link to this recording will be sent to you should you wish to watch the content again at a later stage. It is now my absolute pleasure to hand over to you, Simon, for today's presentation.
Thanks, Prue. Slightly disconcerting talking to an audience of no one, but thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate taking the time to listen to what we've got to say. Hopefully there'll be something worthwhile to take out of it. I'm starting today with a quote from Larry Fink, who's the founder and CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock is a investment management, risk and advisory firm that basically have their finger on the pulse of where society's headed and from a financial point of view. And so he says, society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. And that quote's just designed to set the scene for the journey I want to take you guys on today. So what that is today we will go through these points. It's kind of repeating what Prue said, but I think just framed slightly differently as it's evolved. So the increasing need and desire for sustainability and purpose-led brands, the cultural and consumer trends that have led us to this. We want to explore some brands with their reason for being and sustainability at their heart, and tackle the maze that is understanding what and who to believe. I think that's a particularly interesting one, and to look beyond the consumer to broader organizational benefits of purpose. And finally, I want to take a look at brands out there doing it. Some of them you might know and some of them you might not. So to set the scene today, I think it's important to give context of what brought me here and what brought me to care. I've done about 15 years in the advertising industry in New York and London and Amsterdam, and I've done some pretty fun stuff, I guess. And then recently, I started to become a little bit cynical about advertising per se, because you didn't get to affect outcomes as much as you might like. And so I sort of decided that I wanted to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. At the time, I was working on Topo Chico, which is a seltzer brand that's owned by Coca-Cola, a hard seltzer brand. And that gave me a bit of an interest into the drinks category. And from there, I started to explore how the drinks industry worked a little bit more. And I sort of came to this realization that there's no other situation other than wine and drinks where the consumer goes into this little ecosystem, and then they're making a choice with all this different stimuli about what they care about the most. And it sort of boils down to, especially in wine, what's on the label. But then it's interesting because after boiling it down to that sort of moment in time and that little piece of decision making, you've then got to take that decision and make that decision big again by sharing it with the people that you care about and the people that and the occasion that you're caring about. And mostly it's a positive one. So it's very unique in a marketing challenge in that it's almost the ultimate form of marketing in terms of branding and design. But beyond that, purpose and sustainability and all the other external factors that come into it around a positive interaction that people are having. So from there, I thought that aligned very well with my desire for creative solutions and also to have a bit more purpose in my own life. I had twins recently at the time, and that brought me to Denomination. So I think I'm a representation of Denomination today, but the heart of what Denomination is, it's a company that's been around for 20 years. It's designed by two female founders who have always wanted to be experts in the drinks category, and they have been. They've done a bloody good job. They've won Drinks Agency of the Year in 2016, 2017, 2019, and 2021. And what drew me to this company is that everything they do, they want to do properly, and they want to do it properly the first time. And so one of the huge things that they've wanted to do properly is have a positive footprint in the industry. I just flashed this up because I think it's a good way of getting a feel for the type of work that we do, and that we are genuine experts in what we do. We basically have a group of specialists in the drinks category that can really understand consumer behaviour across all major markets, and as well as understand the drivers of key players in our field. So why wine? Change, why we can't afford to wait. I liked this quote: wine is like the canary in the coal mine for climate change. Anyone who's in the industry will absolutely understand that what you give back and take out of the earth needs to be balanced to get a good result, whether that be around any type of farming, but specifically around wineries. And the reality of global temperatures rising is that if it rises by 2 degrees by 2100, the regions in the world that will be suitable for growing wine grapes could shrink by as much as 56%. And with 4 degrees of warming, 85% of those lands could no longer be able to produce wine. So wine becomes this little microclimate of the bigger problem, but it's just designed to show how if it really affects us. So even if you chose to be a climate denier, there's many other risks at play here. I think climate change is ranked as the biggest threat facing the global economy, ahead of wars and pandemics. But even if you want to ignore that, the disruption that we're all facing around supply chains, increasing raw material and transport costs, and tightening government legislation means that there's just immense amounts of risk that our friend Larry at BlackRock would refer to and say it's time to do something about. We actually, a year and a half ago on World Earth Day, became climate neutral certified. That's a representation of what we believe. Our organisation has become a group of passionate and committed environmentalists. We have a sustainability team who's actually listening in today. So if you have any questions, they'll be able to assist me with any answers around details. Our goal is to be as educated as anyone in the industry around sustainability and purpose, and then be able to pass that on to our clients and people around us, and have a genuine effect on the industry. We actually had members of our team at LuxPack in Monaco last week, and 2/3 of the suppliers that were there were leading with a sustainability message, and that's including organisations that perhaps are needing to change the whole way that they do business to be able to live up to that. So to illustrate this point even further, as part of our process at Denomination, we've always done the traditional 4 C's and 4 P's that most marketers know about around category, consumer, competitors and culture, and product proof, place, which is occasion in our language, and proposition, what's your unique selling proposition. We've recently added a 5th P and a 5th C to our strategic framework. That's how important it is that we address this with every interaction we have and every brand we have. So the 5th C is conscious consumption. It's probably a phrase that everyone's heard used, but in multiple different ways. For us, it's around the fact that every person now has access to information to make a conscious decision on what they purchase and consume on every level. I think that's a pretty powerful thought that I'm going to go into a little bit later. And then purpose is what it says on the tin. So brands have the opportunity to stand for something and give back, and I'm going to explain why it's absolutely vital that brands and companies do that moving forward. So how do we get here? It's interesting to analyze where society is and why we are in the place we are. Basically, no one trusts bureaucracy anymore. So even if the politician that you like the most has the right intentions, there's normally systems in place over generations where they aren't actually able to make the best decision around things like climate, but even just what's good for the people. And that's risen in the past. And I mean, look, this slide's about America, but I'm a Kiwi, and even in New Zealand, where Jacinda Ardern was on a pedestal, there's elements where government and politics don't allow her to be able to make decisions that are actually the best decisions. You add to that social media. So there's a complete distrust in all media at the moment, especially privately owned ones that are related to public companies with politicians involved. I think social media is a double-edged sword in that it gives us the ability to access information, but it also gives, through the algorithms, gives us the ability to have a one-sided viewpoint on things. So no matter what you believe, you can find information out there that helps you believe it, and then you can share it to your friends. I have to admit, I like to consider myself relatively sane, but I do have some friends that fit into the conspiracy theory part of things, and I find myself even going down a rabbit hole around things of what to believe and not knowing what to believe, and then not knowing where that leaves you today is very, very confusing. There are some positive things coming through. I read about Substack. So Substack is I call it the Spotify of journalism. So you can actually pay directly to support independent journalists who are talking in a way without any lens of a publication or an owner or all the other things that make people have a particular slant on things. So go check out Substack if you support independent journalism. So this is an interesting one, and not something that I thought I'd be saying 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I think the prevailing attitude around business was it was probably kind of okay to make money in business in any which way, as long as it wasn't illegal. And you didn't have too much of a duty of care to the consumer. And that's completely switched on its head. So now business is actually more trusted than government organizations and NGOs and media. So that puts it in a perilous place where it has a huge amount of responsibility, but at the same time, it's a huge opportunity. I think the globalization of tribalism is helping cause that. I think whereas perhaps previously we were tribal in terms of nationality or race or religion, we now can be tribal around our beliefs on a global level and the companies we support. And so businesses are able to tap into that sense of tribalism. And I'll actually talk about a tribe a so-called tribe that we helped create later on. If you don't believe me, even Biden's mate, John Kerry, is saying it, and Time magazine. The truth is that in 2022, big business has the power to influence and halt much of what the government does. I'm convinced unless the private sector buys into this, there won't be a sufficient public sector path created because the private sector has the power to prevent it. So it's this real conflicting around who's responsible for positive change. And at the end of the day, it goes government down through business into consumer, but then consumer up back through business to government. And at the moment, I think consumer back up through business to government is probably a more powerful path for change. And this illustrates this as well. So general people are saying that 68% believe CEOs should step in when governments do not fix the societal problems. Obviously in the news, things around Facebook and algorithms and all that, but there's probably 100 different examples that I could give you there that believes the CEO is responsible, and poor old Zuckerberg's faced the music a fair few times. And they believe CEOs should take the lead on change rather than waiting for government to impose change on them. Obviously, jurisdiction and change takes time. And so if we're going to be nimble and keep up with the rate of societal change, it has to be on the companies. So these CEOs are becoming responsible for not just their shareholders and board of directors, but they're as responsible to the consumer as well. And I think that's a hugely powerful thing to remember, and it hasn't been the way in the past. To take it one step further, as an individual, voting can at some stages feel like where's the value in it, especially if there's a two-party system, and I won't go into that politics, but what you can do is you can vote with your wallet and with your feet and with the information that you share, whether that be personally or on social media. And it's actually become a hugely empowering way for people to vote. It always has been a place in society like this, but I think more and more it's becoming pronounced. So if you throw all of that away and the big picture stuff, it's interesting to think that the thing that really makes people care is when they actually experience themselves. So even if you're a person who believes that climate change is a political agenda or any of the other factors I've talked about aren't there, what's happened in the last 5 years or so is that in most places in the world, the actual consumer has experienced something that's really made them care. In Australia, the list is as long as your arm, but people experience weather events, whether it be fires or floods, and then in pretty much every other country you can name an extreme weather event. I've deliberately not even bothered to put COVID in here because I think it's a well-trodden path talking about that, but it's another factor. This one's quite special to me in terms of how I think about this. I think the contrast between our everyday lives and our biological needs is becoming more and more pronounced, and people are becoming more aware of it. This particular photo is Lake Wanaka. I'm a Kiwi, if people can't tell my accent, but Lake Wanaka, for me, aside from the memories and things, it has this ability within about a day of being there to completely reset my emotional balance. So I think the more and more people live in society the way it is, and then they experience nature, that need for escapism and mental health awareness is becoming prevalent in our society. Sorry. This one was interesting in that we had a petrochemicals expert come and speak to our sustainability team. I think there's a few things that he taught us that I personally can't unlearn, which I think is a good thing. Further on the biological thing, we actually have biological instincts to stay away from certain materials, and supplies to materials that we currently use in wine as well. On the left there, he described perfume and cologne as a petrochemical soup, which I thought was quite a nice turn of phrase. On my right, he spoke about how crazy it is that people are still going and getting their nails done in salons, and what that actually does to your brain and the chemicals that you're inhaling, and the fact that when you go in there and you get that feeling and that smell, that's actually your biological instincts telling you that you shouldn't be doing that. Sorry for all the people who enjoy getting their nails painted. And then the one that I found really, really fascinating and kind of ironic when it comes to consumerism is the receipt. So I wasn't aware that the BPAs and receipts can sometimes be between 250 and 1,000 times greater than the amount in canned food, which is known to contain BPOs. And if you absorb that ink on certain receipts through your skin, that's extremely harmful to humans. So get digital receipts, and if you want to hold them, don't give them to your kids. So more than that, the ACC is now actively targeting greenwashing this year, warning businesses who make false or most misleading crimes undermine consumer trust and confidence in the market. Poor old Kourtney Kardashian was named the Chief Sustainability Officer for Boho in the same week that Patagonia came out and spoke and made Earth their only shareholder. What Boho did is it's obviously a huge fast fashion brand that, in my opinion, perhaps doesn't have a place in the world, but at a certain price point, it's always going to be successful. Rather than actually doing anything about fast fashion, they created some clothes with messages on it that were potentially the right message, but the clothes were created out of materials that just weren't in any way sustainable. And then whoever did their PR, I don't know, maybe it worked out well for them, but came out at the same time as the Patagonia news and they were certainly not popular with people who understand what greenwashing means. So make sure you're looking into what greenwashing does and what it is and how that could apply to your company. So these are some stats that I've pulled from our report, Power and Passion report in 2021 about what Australians are passionate about when it comes to sustainability. And this is specific around alcohol brands. So these speak for themselves. People are ready to act and they're ready to reward the brands and businesses that do act. 3 in 5 say they're actively looking for brands and products that support causes or have environmentally friendly attributes. 50% of Australians say that they purchase a product at least in part within the last month because they support a social or environmental issue. And more than 1 in 5 say they did so in the last week. To build on that, if you talk about our Gen Z, in the over 80% of them are genuinely concerned about climate change, mental health, and our oceans. I don't have the stats on Gen X. I actually wasn't sure what the next generation, but one of the girls in the office told me what it was. But I'm sure that that's only going to increase. So it's time to start doing something. And people are willing to pay. So I don't think these stats are probably as compelling as they could be, but I think that this is going to continue to increase for people as conscious consumerism becomes more mainstream and the tribalism that's related back to that conscious consumerism. Round 6 and 10 will pay more, and 14% said they'd definitely be willing to pay up to 10% more. So I don't know how that works with budgets, but that's a fact. And then here, I think this is probably ever evolving, but being made in Australia, having recyclable packaging and mental health issues and causes Australians want beverage brands to do. I think this moves fast and it's far more nuanced than these 3 pieces, which I'll go into a little bit further. I actually have here a brand called Tread Softly. Most people on here are probably aware of it, but I thought it was a good example of a brand that's done the things that I've described to date really, really well. And it happens to be a Denomination one, but we're extremely proud of it. So I'm unashamedly making it that. We created this specifically for Gen Z and the values that they have. We deliberately made every part of the packaging minimalist and sustainable and recyclable as much as possible. But then beyond that, for every carton purchase, we plant a tree. So at the moment, we've actually planted 200,000 trees, and that will remove 400,000 tons of CO2 once they're fully grown. And then to illustrate my point around tribalism earlier, there's actually a group of people that call themselves the Tread Tribe that are so passionate about this brand that they say if you're going to have an indulgence in wine, then you should do it in a way that is as sustainable as possible. And I think that's quite powerful that they gave themselves that name. And this brand is really worked out well. Oh, a little animation there. Our creative founder, Margaret, says that we're happy to continue to do anything with a brand as long as it keeps to its absolute integrity. And with Tread Softly, it's so beautifully simple and the mission's so clear and the purpose is so clear that it's really easy to see how that continues to translate. So we've gone on to create a number of different things under the same brand with the same philosophy. And I think from a marketing point of view, my test of an amazing brand and amazing campaign is always how easy it is to write lines for it. I think that's always a good acid test of whether it works or not. And with Tread Softly, the lines almost fall off the page. So every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the kind of world that you want. Spreading Earth love this Mother's Day. And we give a sip about our future. So you could write those all day for the brand, and they would continue to be powerful and speak to the consumer and the mindset that the person who chooses this brand is. I have no actual point on this other than to say how beautiful the gin bottle looks with the botanicals in the background, and to say that it extends far beyond just wine in this situation, because the brand lives over and above and the purpose above the wine. My mother's here from New Zealand, and I got her to try the wine yesterday, and even the name and this nature of the wine and the name match up beautifully as well, was the way she described it. So my point there is that when you have a clear connection between sustainability, brand, and purpose, it helps drive consumer understanding and memorability, as well as engagement. And further to that point, everyone on this call will be familiar with Taylor's. Taylor's vineyard was actually on land that previously used to be underwater. When they found the land, they found fossilized seahorses, and those fossilized seahorses they saw as a representation of the fact that the land was fertile, but also a representation of the fact that had once been underwater, which is quite poignant for the conversation today. So over the years, Taylor's have continued to push on what that seahorse means, and they now give to the Institute of Marine Science and another number of other marine-related charities as part of their brand. And so it's the seahorse and the sustainability part is a key part of their brand. It doesn't necessarily come through quite as strongly as Tread Softly, but it's a beautiful story. And then for anyone who doesn't know, the seahorse is considered to be a barometer of the health of the ocean as well. So there's a really, really nice analogy in that if there are seahorses in coral reef, then they're considered to be a healthy ocean. This one has a slightly different lens to it. I think the messaging hierarchy is not as clearly all about sustainability or all about conservation, but I think it works really, really beautifully because of the way that all the aspects work together. So obviously the wombat is the state insignia of South Australia. And the brand is wanted to partner up with the wildlife rescue team at Wise to support the work they do rescuing and treating wombats. Wombats are their population is not in a good place, but it also has quite close ties to Barossa. And the name Little Giant speaks to the wombat. It speaks to the nature of the full-bodied wine that it produces, and also sort of talks to the purpose and the cause. So I think everyone will be familiar with Little Giant. I don't know if it is quite as overt as Tread Softly about what it's there to do, but it has multiple layers of consumer engagement. And when I've shown this wine around to people, everyone recognizes it and has a warmth towards it. Then they're not all necessarily sure what warmth it is, but it's a warmth regardless. And so to change direction a little bit, to just not make it all about putting like the story on the bottle, Rewine is a very interesting company. There was a report that said that there's a $4.5 trillion US opportunity around going circular globally. Rewine is a company that's actually been well ahead of its time. It has been around since 2005. They sell wines directly out of barrels, which they source locally, and they only sell it in recyclable bottles. So they source it locally so that it doesn't there's no carbon footprint from travel, and then they're as recyclable as possible. And I think there's obviously a lot to doing something like this, but any step you can make in the right direction around being circular is a positive step and something to really think about. I think long term, being circular is going to be more and more at the forefront of everyone's thoughts. A good example of a brand that perhaps is circular and perhaps we don't notice is probably Nudie Jeans. They set out originally to create jeans that stand the test of time and are designed to be fixed, and there's actually pride in it being old and long lasting. So I've always been drawn to that brand, and I think it's a good example of how there's lots of different ways to be circular. You guys are probably all familiar with Cowpunk, but if not, look Cowpunk up. It's a brand that's trying to play in that circular space, and it's a good example of how you can do that. So I'm going to change direction a little bit more and add to add on top of sustainability with another layer of purpose. I think it's important because I see it as a bit bigger than just the brand, and it's about the business. And then the brands sort of drop out of that. So what we've found is that almost 4 in 5 people say that brands and products should support causes or make changes to their products that address social and environmental issues. But even beyond that, 71% of job seekers want to work for a company that aligns with their values. If you've got the choice between working somewhere where they genuinely care about things that you value, and back to the tribalism point and the reason why I'm at Denomination, you're gonna take the choice where it aligns with your values every time. And so companies need to understand the value of that internally, and having people who align with their values also has a massive effect on their outward facing products. Excuse me. So just reading this, when you have a cause that is aligned with your product, your consumer, and stakeholders' expectations, your action in that space becomes meaningful and relatable, and as a result, you can have a meaningful long-term impact out in the real world. So this is at the C-suite or the owner's table to think about, and it's not something that you can in any way rush. You need to think of it as any healthy relationship. You need to put in work, go well beyond transactional. Then there needs to be attraction and connection and shared values to begin with, otherwise it won't last. So I found that I like this because it's an analogy of how you can start to think about where you align, that we can all relate to as people rather than as a business, and I think that's important. This is actually an old slide, but I thought it was important because I'm philosophizing about what the next step is a little bit. So in the past, if you think of a brand like Hoover or any of those really, really good brands of the past that people resonate, it was all about the fact that the product was bloody good and did a bloody good job. In the last 20 years, there's been a huge layer on top of that your customer experience beyond the product or service has to be extremely good. But now that's also considered just a barrier to entry. And then now, well, we are in a situation where I trust your impact on society will be good. But this is ever evolving, and I think there's actually more to it than that. So how do you go about thinking about purpose for your brand or company, preferably company? I think it's an intersection between what people want, so what the consumer needs, what the world needs, so where we're at from sustainable behaviors point of view, or as an example, and what your brand can uniquely offer. There's no point in going in on something that your brand doesn't have a point of difference on. So if I haven't convinced you so far from an emotional point of view around purpose, for those that are a bit more on the nose when it comes to the business point of view, these are some slightly wonky slides around the benefits of social purpose beyond the ones I've talked about. It's a point of differentiation. It attracts the best talent. It's a conversation starter in any situation. It definitely generates trust on all levels. It increases loyalty on all levels. You are genuinely contributing to society in a positive way, and it's almost always good for business performance. So I'm happy to share this slide with anyone if they need to sell it up through their organization. I kind of want to focus a little bit on what not to do to bring it into a positive space of what to do. And so just because there is a topic, it doesn't mean that you have the right to talk about it. I don't know if people have watched We Crashed, but it's a hell of a show if you have. It's on Apple TV, and it's interesting on multiple levels around IPOs and things, but it's kind of the case study of how necessarily elevating yourself without any purpose, without actually true connection to it is perhaps not the right way to go. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but WeWork had the slogan, elevate the world's consciousness. And then in the show, it talks a lot about how they're trying to they're trying to have such lofty ambitions and change the world, but they're just not relatable to what is essentially a co-working space. So go and watch the show, but essentially today they're talking about empowering tomorrow's world at work. I don't know that that's particularly meaningful, but it's better than the place where it is, where the ambition is so lofty that it doesn't make any sense. Doritos is an interesting one. So Doritos is a Pepsi-owned brand. Excuse the pixelated Google images, but what Doritos is trying to do here is they're trying to do something positive in terms of attaching themselves to mental health and giving back. And they've chosen a really, really good partner in Reach Out. I sort of put this one out there because I'm not sure how it fits or not. I think it's a hugely positive thing that Doritos are going after a positive impact message and Reach Out. But then there's this slight uncomfortableness around a snack food and talking to mental health youth that just doesn't know if they're perfect pairs. So I'm a little bit torn on this one. I think there's a lot of positivity in that they're doing the right thing, and they've obviously got a purpose agenda, which is very, very commendable. And then there's this slight unease as to whether those things fit together. I think this particular campaign and its success will be defined on what their long-term strategy is. I think if they have a long-term investment strategy around mental health and it's not something that they're doing in the short term, and it's like a 5 to 10 year plan and they live and breathe it, then they can own it. And I'll show you an example of how that's worked later on. So the truth is you need to do it the right way. I touched on Patagonia earlier. It's just immensely powerful. The saying great brands shouldn't cost us the earth is something that most people would have heard these days. But what Patagonia has done, for anyone who isn't aware, is that they have given 98% of their profits moving forward to a trust, which gives back to environmental issues. So they have voting rights with the 2%, and obviously the people who own the company, which was still private up until this point, have made a ton of money. They're billionaires, so money is not a huge issue for them, but they still have control of the company. But the company is now purely there to give back to the environment, which is where the brand came from originally. If anyone doesn't know the backstory, it was an outdoor type bloke who really wanted to create long-standing products that would stand the test of time and wouldn't be harsh on the environment and wasn't fast fashion. And so that's probably he's really put his money where his mouth is in terms of that, and that's an example of purpose. Ironically, I can see this brand going gangbusters in terms of sales moving forward. It certainly drew me further to the brand, and instead of that going into shareholders' pockets, it's going back to the earth. So why would you not do it? I worked quite closely recently with Campfire X. Campfire X is an Indigenous Australian-led creative consultancy. There is at the moment a lot of brands that are wanting to tackle the issue of how they can give back to the Indigenous community. There's a lot of brands that didn't understand what that truly means, and how education is the key point here, and that just doing short-term things is in some ways unhelpful. So if you are in any way interested in working with the Indigenous community, then Campfire X are a group of Indigenous men that really take people on a journey. It's a 6-month engagement before you could even consider associating yourself with it, and it's a really powerful way to learn about the issues that are facing Indigenous culture, and how brands and companies can play a role, and not just a role where they're attaching themselves to the topic of the moment. And I think you've got to be very careful about that with any topic that you talk about. Interestingly, in our office at the moment, we had quite a long debate over a glass of wine around this statement. We shouldn't associate alcohol with Indigenous culture, and I think it's an interesting one, because if you think about what purpose is and all the things that I've described before, in some ways saying this is problematic in itself. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that no one should go into any arrangement around purpose with too much preconceived notion. It depends on that attraction and what you really want to achieve over a period of time, and then how you can apply that to your organization. So I can see situations where the alcohol industry could have a really powerful positive effect with Indigenous culture if done the right way, and I can see situations where it could be a case of being inappropriate. So something to think about. Just to keep going through around this drinking for good, I wanted to show you some companies that have done drinking for good arguably well, just to stimulate people's thought. So I was on a rooftop in New York, and I was talking to a bloke about how he was going to convert CO2 into vodka. My first instinct was whatever substance he was taking at that party, I perhaps did or didn't want some of. But years later, after that, they've turned it into a real company. So Air Company takes excess CO2 and then uses that to create industrial products. They quite smartly chose vodka, I think, because it's a consumer-first product that people will understand and can relate to. I would love to be able to explain the science to you, but I'd completely butcher it, so I'm not going to. But I don't think that the vodka particularly has been a massive seller from a distribution point of view, but it has proven out the concept, and they're now creating perfumes and fuels out of this. So it's a company to look up. It's interesting in that the very core of what it does ladders up and outwards rather than consumer first. Look, I don't know enough about it to know how much of it is around getting the right investment, and how much of the process is really truly solving a problem. But at least on the surface, and from my lack of knowledge around science and stuff, it seems to be doing the right thing. This one's resonated with me as a Kiwi. It's effortlessly simple. So Kiwi Rangers, it's a brand that has purely set out to give back. So save wildlife while you sip. It's unashamedly doing exactly what it says on the tin. I think the one around giving 10% of profits donated back to Kiwi conservation for their brown kiwi with whiskey, ginger and lime is quite good. 10% seems like quite a generous amount to be giving back, which makes it feel real. And I can knowing Kiwi culture, I can definitely see a situation where there'd be plenty of consumers who are happy to have that brown can in their hand around a barbecue and have a conversation starter. So the good that they're doing is obviously the money, but the awareness and using their product as a vehicle is quite powerful as well. So I wanted to touch on a brand that's actually surprisingly done this relatively well over a period of time. So Absolute Vodka, obviously there's a problematic relationship between drinking responsibly on many different levels and alcohol. And so they've actually got a company policy at Pernod around drinking responsibly, and it's come through really strongly on Absolute Vodka. So they've addressed issues around sex, and they've addressed issues around the LGBTQA environment as well, and they've made it part of their not just to do it short term, but to do it long term. And I think it actually puts Absolute up there in terms of, like, obviously it's really hard to retrofit a purpose to a product that's so established, and with that it'd be problematic, but they've done a good job of doing it properly. On the right, probably not a topic that I'm qualified to talk about, but I think the point on Vodka Cruiser is, if you look up their solo project there, they've obviously gone after a taboo topic around self-pleasure. I don't know whether that is a purpose that they can align to. I think it's probably around let's talk about our demographic. How can we get noise, and how can we attach ourselves to a taboo topic? And I'd probably suggest that that's probably in the way where the consumer won't feel that it's genuine. But I'm not the consumer, so I'm not 100% sure. And then I'm going to finish with Sparky. So Sparky is a brand that I think we probably wish we created. It's a proudly female-owned brand, and they took on the gig to ignite the good in alcohol. They acknowledge it has a dark side, and it won't solve your problems, but it has a place in society. They're tackling a number of things with this brand. So they're tackling the alcohol's an old boys club, and they want to set up a new club, but then they're also tackling topics that are really, really important within that space as well. So think Share a Coke campaign, that insight, and then doing it on another level around social commentary around what's important at the moment. So they have an endless marketing message that they have now via their vehicle. It's really, really clever. I think that it has the potential to stand the test of time if they're on top of their consumer interests and what they care about, and actually driving understanding of the issues at play. So I'm going to leave you with a quote that brings this whole thing together, hopefully. We have this view of think big, start small, but start today. And that's one of the things you need in the industry, to take a brave and courageous step to represent what change could look like. What you have to do is start with what you can control. That's it for me, Prue.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. And some really, really great examples in there from both the beverage industry and outside of it that I'm sure is providing some inspiration, getting all those wine businesses online thinking about this whole space. There's certainly, I think it seems like that emotional connection to sustainability has to exist before you can really start that brand journey and get the sales benefits, if I interpreted everything correctly.
You put it more eloquently than me.
Yeah. But everyone online, we've got Simon here for a few more minutes, and he is absolutely an advertising guru. So please put those questions into the Q&A now. Whilst we're waiting for that, I actually got a question message straight through to me, Simon. And
I actually have my sustainability team from Denomination listening as well. So
fantastic.
They're going to take notes, and if anyone wants to follow up, as I said, we've just been at the pack, well, I forget what it's called, but we've been at the Sustainability Summer in Monaco. It clearly wasn't me that went there. Some of them were there. So if you've got any very specific questions, I probably didn't go into too much technical stuff today because I thought it might be a bridge too far in this format, but I'm certainly happy to go away and answer any of those more technical questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Simon. The first question actually flows on beautifully from your last slide, I think, and quote there. And the question is, how do brands that haven't had an overt purpose in the past credibly start to stand for something? So yeah, really great question, actually, because I imagine there's a lot of brands out there that haven't ventured into this space, and it's like, okay, where do I start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to start with depending on the structure of the brand, it has to start with the business, actually. I think you don't need to have an overt purpose right now, but you need to be able to identify as a business what could actually be a sustainable overt purpose. I think I made an analogy around a relationship, and you probably need to do a piece of work around what that could be, and not assume that I think, because there's I think there's a few examples there between Tread Softly and Little Giant and stuff. Like, overt doesn't have to be tread softly. It can be something that simmers beneath the surface, that is aligned with your values and can move up. And the reason why I didn't just talk about sustainability and I talked about purposes is that purpose is a very broad thing that brands can own, and it opens up a lot more opportunities within purpose to find something that aligns with you. And if you're an owner operator, it can be down to your beliefs, to be honest, because you can put a company around those beliefs and continue to build on that. And you want to listen to the consumer. 100% you want to listen to the consumer, but it's got to start with you or the people around you.
Absolutely, and it's fantastic to have know that there is, design agencies like Denomination out there that can, help with that journey and getting people started. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. First one around sustainability certification. So, what do you think about them? Are they worth it, or do all the different ones out there just confuse consumers? I'm not sure if this is a you question, Simon, or the sustainability
I
team.
can answer it I think I can go back and give the details around which ones you should and shouldn't go after. I think the most important step is around educating yourselves around it. So I probably when I've done a fair bit of education relatively recently myself around this, and it's easy to become passionate and knowledgeable about it if you want to do it. So it's not to say I don't want to go right now and say one certification is better than the other, but I think it's the principle of continued learning around that. I think it has to start with the organization taking sustainable practices, highlighting them to the people within the organization and making them a priority, the same way you have values within your family or other workplaces, and then going outwards from there. But we're happy to give advice of certain situations. If anyone wants to reach out, our team will be happy to give you advice on how to approach that. When it comes to the actual packaging aspect of sustainability, it's extremely nuanced, and I would recommend that you use experts to start with where you want to. There's a reality around cost of goods that you probably have to take into account when you're starting as well. But the nuance between the price that you can charge the consumer and all that sort of stuff, those are realities. And a lot of what I talked about today was obviously principle based.
Yeah, wonderful. And we have contact details for that person in the audience, so we can get in touch directly. The next question is great branding and packaging. What's inside the bottles and cans? Didn't see any certified organic or biodynamic symbols. How important is this to the consumer, I guess, based on your experience?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I think as a branding agency, particularly, we often don't have too much of an ability to affect the outcome of the actual product inside the bottle. I think it depends on what the product is. From a wine point of view, I think it still goes that people are thinking about taste first and how it makes them feel before that. But it's a really, really important point. I think. I guess the best way for me to answer it is if I go back to that initial analogy around that moment in time and how many different messages you've got in the messaging hierarchy and how you're making that decision. It depends what you as a company want the consumer to think. If everything that you do from a growing grapes point of view and a sustainable vineyard point of view is the core of what you believe in, because you're farmers at heart, for example, and you believe about sustainable farming, then the consumer will care. Does every consumer care? No, but we don't need every consumer to care. We want the ones that do care to care. And so I think that's probably the best way to answer that.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, I think that might be all the questions for today, Simon. I have no doubt there's plenty of questions racing around in everyone's minds, and you might get a few follow-up emails. Actually, I have had one come through on the chat, if you don't mind answering one more. Hey, what are the words we need to use to say we want you to taste wines and we want you to drink responsibly without it feeling like a nag to millennials?
Oh,
yeah. Can you see that?
It's a good question.
What are the words?
I know what you mean. I think probably what we're underestimating with that is how much millennials care. I think as a person of my own age, I think when I started to explore this topic and as I've immersed myself in this, I think the play around social media and understanding how you care and tribalism and stuff is I don't think we are nagging to millennials. I think we're actually, as people who are at a different stage of our lives, we're actually probably the opposite. We're probably not as au fait with how much they care. In terms of words we want to use to say you taste wine and drink responsibly, I'm not sure without. Actually.
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Simon. Okay, well, I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you to yourself again for your time and knowledge. Like always, this session is recorded, so everybody can go back and watch the content again. And as Simon said, he's very happy for you to reach out to him and his team directly with any further questions you may have. Our next and final webinar for the year will be held on Tuesday, 8th of November, presented by podcaster and Wine Communicator Award winner James Atkinson from Drinks Adventures. Registrations will be open soon on the WCA website, so keep an eye out for that one. If you have any suggestions on webinar topics you'd like us to cover in next year's program, please email me directly at wca@winecommunicators.com.au. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.